A SWAT officer tased a royal guard on duty in broad daylight in front of tourists and cameras. But what happened next? 7 minutes later, a royal convoy pulled up to the gates and refused to move until the situation was handled their way. Want to know exactly how it unfolded? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The autumn afternoon light at Horse Guards Parade had that particular London quality, bright but crisp, making tourists pull their scarves tighter as they lined up behind the rope barriers. Phones ready, voices dropping to whispers. Even the loudest groups seemed to understand they were stepping into something bigger than themselves. Mounted beneath the central archway sat Trooper Nathan Bell, absolutely motionless atop a magnificent black Frisian. His crimson tunic was pressed sharp enough to cut yourself on. His breastplate gleamed like a mirror, and his white gloves gripped the reins with textbook precision. To everyone watching, he looked like every other ceremonial cavalryman you've seen in postcards. The perfect picture of British pageantry, polished and pristine. But here's what those tourists didn't know about the man sitting so still in that saddle. Bell had served 3 tours in Afghanistan with 3 PAR. He'd held ground during a civilian extraction while sniper fire cracked overhead. There was a shrapnel scar along his right side, from an IED that still XD when the weather changed, if you knew what to look for. The subtle way he favoured his left hip, his controlled breathing, you could see the signs of a man who'd learned discipline where it meant survival. But he didn't talk about any of that. Didn't post about it online. Nothing in his bearing ever announced it to the crowds. He was just part of the show, a tradition, a photo opportunity. That was about to change, because across the square, 3 black SUVs had just pulled up in a way that made the palace security staff reach for their radios. The first vehicle didn't belong there. Neither did the second. By the time the third rumbled past the no vehicle access sign and parked crooked near Horse Guards Road, you could feel something shift in the air. It wasn't panic. Not yet. It was that subtle tension you get when everyone around you realizes something's wrong, but nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. The guards couldn't move. Protocol wouldn't let them. Inside the nearby security post, a civilian palace staffer set down her tea with a soft clink and quietly pressed a button under her desk. The one marked unscheduled diplomatic activity. The SUVs had diplomatic plates, sure, but the wrong kind. No royal escort, no ceremonial formation, no entry logged at Admiralty Arch. These weren't dignitaries arriving for afternoon tea with the Foreign Secretary. They'd bypassed every checkpoint, ignored every protocol, and rolled up like they owned. The place outstepped Lieutenant Carl Rains, 6 foot 2, tactical vest, open-mirrored sunglasses, early 40s, American SWAT, supposedly on loan to some UK-US exercise in Essex, but his swagger said he wasn't in Essex anymore. Behind him, 4 men in tactical gear emerged. One carried a training non-lethal duffel. All bore American flag patches and TACDEV X tabs. Tourists made room. Something felt aggressive about these men. 2 stewards approached with British urgency. "Excuse me, sir. This is a restricted, ceremonial area." Rains flashed a credential without slowing. Lieutenant Rains, US Tactical Exchange Joint Ops Oversight. "Sir, this isn't an approved observation area." "Relax, mate. We're not here to break anything." He stepped past the rope barriers. "You must be the welcoming committee." L didn't move, not even a blink. Rains studied the stillness like a party trick. "I've seen shop window mannequins more responsive. Bet you 20 quid he's asleep under that helmet." Uncomfortable chuckles from tourists. Rains pulled out a protein bar, unwrapped it, and circled Bell's horse while chewing. The horse shifted, but Bell rebalanced smoothly. "What's the deal? You blink, you lose. Or are you trained to ignore people?" The steward stepped closer. "Sir, you're violating ceremonial boundaries. These guards are under active royal protocols. What's he going to do? Glare me to death. Tourists had stopped taking selfies. Now they were just watching, waiting. You could feel the tension building, like static electricity before a thunderstorm. You could pinpoint the exact moment Rains got bored. He shifted his weight, let out an exaggerated yawn, and crossed his arms like a man waiting for a delayed flight. The ceremonial silence that tourists found so impressive, it was starting to get under his skin. This is security, he scoffed. This is what you put between your royalty and the real world, a guy in fancy dress on a horse. He tapped his temple mockingly. I swear he's just a life-sized action figure. Few tourists exchanged awkward glances. An elderly woman whispered to her husband, perhaps we should move along. But they didn't move because Rains was just getting started. He stepped closer. The horse's ears flicked, but Bell didn't flinch. Eyes fixed on that invisible point ahead. I'm just interacting, Ree said when the steward protested. We're allies. I've got clearance. You know I've watched videos of these guys. They're not allowed to move right no matter what you do. Perfect job for someone who flunked basic but still wanted the uniforms. He spoke into his shoulder mic. We've got a situation. Suspect in a persistent vegetative state. Might need a defibrillator. His teammates laughed. A few tourists chuckled nervously. Rains unclipped something black with yellow markings. A taser. Let's see if this statue twitches. Sir, no. The steward lunged forward too far away. The taser clicked. The dart struck Bell's thigh below his cuirass. Sergeant reared slightly, but Bell absorbed the shock. His grip tightened imperceptibly. He didn't fall, didn't cry out. When the current ended, Bell remained mounted, positioned correctly, staring ahead. Rains stepped back, grinning. Just a test, training exercise, gasps from tourists. A child whispered. Did that man hurt the soldier? Kept breathing steadily. Blood seeped through his glove, where his grip had tightened. Nobody laughed. From deep within the palace, shadows moved. The silence that followed wasn't respectful tourist quiet. This was heavy silence that comes right before everything changes. Bell sat exactly as before. If anything, he looked taller. His grip remained textbook perfect. His saber hung undisturbed. But you could see the evidence, the scorch mark darkening his breeches, the red streak in his white gloves. He had taken a direct hit from a live electrical weapon, and he was still sitting perfectly upright, maintaining his post, like it was just another Tuesday afternoon. Rains chuckled, but the sound came out hollow now, lacking the confidence it had carried just minutes earlier. Well, that's one way to test your focus under pressure. Nobody was laughing with him anymore. The steward beside the rope barrier was already speaking into his sleeve mic in those clipped coded phrases that security personnel use when situations have moved beyond routine. His face didn't show panic. It showed training kicking in. Within 60 seconds, a plain-clad corporal from the Royal Military Police emerged from the West Wing. He wore no hat, carried no weapon, just an earpiece and a green armband trimmed in gold. He approached Rains with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent years ending situations without having to raise his voice. Sir, I need you to step away from the guard immediately. Rains pivoted, saw the armband and gave another one of those sarcastic little salutes. Easy there, officer friendly, I didn't damage your living statue. This is ceremonial territory under active sovereign detail, the corporal replied evenly. You've engaged in unauthorized use of a weapon against a member of the Queen's Guard while on active duty. Oh, come on, Rains, said his voice taking on that incredulous tone people use when they think everyone else is overreacting. It's a taser. Not even close to lethal. I honestly didn't think he'd even feel it through all that fancy costume. And look, he didn't even flinch. The corporal's expression didn't change. Sir, step back from the guard, remove any visible weapons and place them on the ground. Now you're serious about this. The corporal didn't answer with words, but behind him 2 more royal MPs had materialized. Not running, not shouting, just moving with that particular kind of purpose that makes smart people start cooperating immediately. Rain's team began to shift nervously. The one with the expensive sunglasses took a half step forward before catching himself. Another muttered something unintelligible under his breath. The corporal's eyes never left Rains's face. "Are you refusing to comply with a direct order on Crown property?" "Lieutenant, look, I'm here under diplomatic training." "Protocol!" Rains snapped his composure, finally starting to crack. "I've got immunity status. We're doing some kind of urban mobility workshop with your Ministry of Defense next week. This whole thing is it's a misunderstanding." A pause. Then the corporal said, with the kind of calm that somehow sounds more threatening than shouting that can be sorted out through proper channels. "Not here." Let out an agitated breath clearly, realizing that his usual approach wasn't working in this particular situation. He placed the taser on the ancient cobblestones with an exaggerated sigh. "There, are we all happy now?" The corporal didn't answer because behind him, another figure had entered the scene. Captain Hannah Ree Royal, Horse Guards mid-fours, with that particular bearing that comes from 20 years of managing situations where protocol meets crisis. Her chestnut hair was pinned in a regulation bun that hadn't shifted despite the October breeze. Her dress blues were pressed to perfection, and her eyes had the colour and warmth of fog rolling over the Tomps walked directly toward Bell's horse. Ignoring Rains entirely, as if he'd already ceased to be relevant to the situation, she stopped just left of Bell's stirrup and looked up at him with the professional assessment of a commanding officer checking on her soldier. "Trooper Bell," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the courtyard, "are you capable of continuing your post?" For a moment, Bell's jaw flexed slightly, the first real sign of human response he'd shown since the whole ordeal began. His lips didn't part, but something shifted in his posture. Then, without moving his eyes from that fixed point ahead, without looking down at his captain, he spoke. Still fit for duty. "Mum." His voice wasn't loud, but in the hushed courtyard, it landed like a stone dropped into still water. Captain Ree gave a single sharp nod. No drama, no fuss, just professional acknowledgement between soldiers. Then she turned to the RMP corporal. "Secure the American personnel under temporary observation until Palace. Protocol can provide guidance. No external communication until this is resolved." Mom Rains let out a bark of disbelieving laughter. "You're joking. I'm not under arrest here." Captain Ree turned her head just enough to make eye contact. "You're under review." And just like that, with no more ceremony than a gear clicking into place, the entire dynamic in the courtyard shifted. Tourists backed away without being asked. Phones were lowered and pocketed. A quiet understanding settled over everyone. Present something sacred had been violated here today. But the soldier hadn't broken, and now the people who'd built this tradition were going to remind the man who tried to break it exactly where he stood in the order of things. Because somewhere, down the mall, just 7 minutes away from Horse Guards, a royal convoy was making an unscheduled turn, and it wouldn't be passing through those gates until this situation was properly addressed. The sound started as a distant rumble, so faint you might have mistaken it for London traffic if you weren't listening carefully. But then came the unmistakable rhythm of perfectly synchronized motorcycle engines, followed by the deeper, more refined purr of vehicles that cost more than most people's houses. The royal convoy. No sirens, no flashing lights, no need for either. When the crown moves through London, the city simply makes room. First came the motorcycle outer riders. 5 of them in black leathers and chrome, their blue strobes pulsing silently. As they swept around the corner from Horse Guards Road, behind them, 2 Rolls-Royce limousines in that distinctive dark maroon that only one family in Britain is allowed to use, followed by support vehicles that looked ordinary until you noticed. The way they moved, coordinated, purposeful, expensive. Captain Ree turned toward the palace gates, her expression shifting in a way that only trained military personnel would recognize. Calm sharpening into absolute precision. A suited aide was already moving toward her from the gatehouse, and they exchanged a few brief words that no one else could hear. The convoy didn't continue through the gates. Instead, it stopped. Right there in the middle of the ceremonial approach, engines idling quietly, windows tinted too dark to see through. But the message couldn't have been clearer if they'd hung a banner from the lead vehicle. Royalty was watching, not intervening, not making demands, just waiting to see how the palace would handle its own affairs. Rains laughed, but it came out sharp and nervous now. "Oh, for real, is that one of your royals in there?" He shielded his eyes dramatically and leaned forward like he was trying to peer through the bulletproof glass. "She here to knight the mannequin or something?" His voice still carried that forced bravado, but you could hear the cracks forming underneath. The swagger that had carried him through the last 20 minutes was starting to wobble. His men had gone completely silent now, and one of them had removed his sunglasses to clean them with the kind of intense focus that people use when they're trying to avoid eye contact with everyone around them. No, one responded to his joke, not the MPs, not Captain Ree, not even the tourists who seemed to sense that the rules of the game had just changed completely. The tension in the courtyard deepened like pressure dropping before a storm. From the south, entrance 2, matte green Land Rovers with Royal Military Police markings rolled into view. Not speeding, not rushing, just moving with the kind of deliberate purpose that usually precedes either formal arrests or very serious conversations. The lead. Vehicle's door opened and out stepped Colonel James Lowry. If you wanted to cast someone to play senior British military officer in a movie, you'd choose someone who looked exactly like Colonel Lowry. Silver hair, perfectly trimmed tall enough to look down at most people without trying uniforms, so perfectly pressed it could probably stand up by itself. The kind of man who didn't need to speak loudly to command attention in rooms full of generals and whose measured silences carried the weight of entire military manuals. He walked across the courtyard with that particular pace that military people recognize immediately. Not fast, not slow, just utterly inevitable. The tourists weren't filming anymore. Phones had been lowered or turned off entirely. Whatever this moment was becoming, it felt too serious for casual documentation. Colonel Lowry didn't look at Rains, didn't acknowledge his team. He walked past the rope barriers, past the MPs, past everyone else, and stopped directly, beside Trooper Bell's left stirrup. There, without any fanfare whatsoever, he removed his dress gloves. Then, with the careful respect you'd show examining a wounded comrade, he reached up and gently lifted the fabric of Bell's ceremonial breeches. The scorch mark was clearly visible, a dark circular burn where the taser dart had penetrated the red wool. The skin underneath was hidden, but the evidence of the assault was undeniable. Colonel Lowry examined the damage for exactly 3 seconds. Then, he gave a single precise nod and let the fabric fall back into place. He turned not to Rains but to Captain Ree. "This is now a sovereign-level incident," he said quietly. But in the hushed courtyard, his words carried to everyone present. "Secure all. Foreign personnel within the operational area. Inform mod. Liaison. That protocol override 47B has been activated." Captain Ree didn't hesitate. "Understood." So now Rains spoke up, his voice louder and more desperate than it had been all afternoon. "Wait, just a minute here. Are you people actually serious about this? I tapped him with a training device. He's obviously fine." No one looked at him. His words just hung in the air, stripped of all the authority they'd carried 20 minutes earlier. "I'm part of a legitimate NATO training group," he continued, gesturing toward his credentials with increasing desperation. "If you reach out to Washington, they will inform you precisely who I am and why I have the right to be here." Colonel Lowry finally turned to look at him, his expression entirely inscrutable. "You had permission to monitor ceremonial functions. However, you lacked the authority to interact with active personnel, and certainly you did not have the permission to assault a British soldier performing his duties under royal jurisdiction." Rains' face was pale now, and he remained motionless. How can it be considered assault when the individual didn't react? Colonel Lowry's reply was icy enough to freeze champagne. "He moved when it mattered, Lieutenant. You did not. What followed was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no weapons drawn, and no cinematic clashes, just the kind of methodical, professional response that makes you realize, often too late, that you have significantly miscalculated whom you are dealing with. Colonel, Larry didn't need to raise his voice. He merely turned to the Royal Military Police Corporal and gave the slightest nod. One of the MPs stepped forward and extended a steady hand. "Sir, I will need to take your remaining weapons. Please comply," slowly and deliberately. With movements that were just a tad too cautious, Rains unsnapped his holster, drew his service pistol with care, and placed it butt first into the corporal's waiting hands. Another MP retrieved the rest of the gear from his belt. Both items were tagged, catalogued, and taken away without any ceremony whatsoever. Colonel Larry turned to Captain Rhee. "Rotate Trooper Bell. Medical evaluation is a priority." "Yes, sir." Soon thereafter, another guard appeared from the stable archway. Trooper Singh, younger and sharper-eyed, already mounted on a horse that perfectly matched Bell's. The handover occurred with a level of precision found only in organizations that have performed the same tasks for centuries. Bell and Singh passed each other in mirrored formation, spines straight, eyes focused ahead. No words were exchanged, no acknowledgement of the crowd or the unfolding drama. It was simply duty continuing without interruption. Bell dismounted behind a privacy screen where a medic was waiting. He moved with a slight limp, barely perceptible unless scrutinized, but he didn't lean on the medic's offered support. He didn't speak, didn't glance back at the courtyard, and showed no sign that what had just transpired was anything more than part of the job. A young aide approached the lead vehicle of the convoy with a sealed envelope displaying official crests. He handed the message to someone within and respectfully stepped back. The Rolls-Royce's indicator blinked once and then went dark. Still, the convoy did not move. Rains made one last attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his afternoon. "So, what's next? Am I banned from your little palace? I poke a guy with a training device and suddenly I'm persona non grata in the United Kingdom." Colonel Lowry stepped closer, so near that Rains had to look slightly upward to maintain eye contact. "You are not banned, Lieutenant," he stated, his voice holding a level of quiet that somehow conveyed more threat than shouting. "You are simply irrelevant." He moved even closer until they were less than an arm's length apart. "That man you struck commanded a forward observation post in Helmand Province, while you were still conducting traffic stops in suburban Kansas. He witnessed a 19-year-old corporal bleed out in his embrace, yet held his ground until the mission concluded. You subjected him to electrical attack. He accepted it without a word and stayed at his post." Colonel Larry's tone remained calm, yet every word landed with surgical accuracy. "You made a fool of yourself in front of child tourists," and now he pointed to the awaiting convoy, Her Royal Highness. He took a moment for that to register. "And you're curious about the saddest part of all this?" Rains seemed unable to find his voice. "He isn't angry with you, nor is he offended. Your actions didn't provoke a reaction or validate any assertions about military effectiveness. You simply lacked significance to him." Another pause, longer this time. "No apology you provide will alter that reality." An aide appeared from the gatehouse carrying a leather folder sealed with red wax. Colonel Larry reviewed the contents and handed it to Captain Rhee. "Notify the Foreign Office that the exchange status for Lieutenant Rains is cancelled effective immediately and escort him and his unit to the embassy perimeter. They are no longer permitted on crowned property under any circumstances." "Understood, sir?" Rains stared in disbelief. "You're dismissing me over this. You're terminating an entire joint training initiative because I assessed some ceremonial actors' reflexes." Colonel Larry turned towards the royal convoy and executed a slight formal nod. The signal was instantly recognized. The leading Rolls-Royce activated its indicator and began moving forward, resuming its original route through the palace gates. As it passed through the square, the vehicle didn't speed up. When you embody a millennium of unbroken tradition, a sense of urgency is beneath you. From behind the tinted glass, just for an instant, a gloved hand emerged between the curtains. Not a wave, nothing informal, simply a fleeting acknowledgement. One of Raines's aides murmured quietly, "Lieutenant, I think it's time for us to leave." Raines glanced around one last time, as if hoping to find a foothold or a final chance to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond his command. But there was nothing left to hold on to. The tourists were observing, yes, but they were no longer focused on him. Their attention was now directed at the red-coated figure who had returned to his post, unfazed, undisturbed, and utterly unchanged by the day's occurrences. And behind those silent stares was a message that required no expression. You don't represent us. You never did. By the time the evening light began to mellow into that soft golden hour hue that gives London an appearance of being painted in watercolours, something resembling normalcy had returned to Horse Guards parade. The square wasn't deserted. Tourists still lined the rope barriers, albeit in fewer numbers than before. But the ambience had shifted fundamentally. Many of those who had observed the afternoon's episode had not departed. They stood quietly, phones tucked away, expressions contemplative. They had witnessed something ineffable, felt deeply within themselves. Then, without fanfare or announcement, Trooper Nathan Bell made his return. He rode in slowly from the western archway, mounted once again on Sergeant, the same striking black horse, the same polished ceremonial saddle, the same impeccable military stance. However, his breeches were now different, freshly pressed to a razor's edge, demonstrating no signs of wear or distress. Yet, all present were aware of the truth concealed behind that immaculate facade. They had witnessed the evidence of the taser's effect. They had seen him endure the electric shock without flinching. They recognized that his return was not merely a matter of professional obligation, it was a declarative choice. Bell took his place again as if he had never been away. His hands were steady, his posture as upright as a sword, and his gaze fixed on that unseen, eternal marker ahead that guards are trained to concentrate on. He offered no acknowledgement to the crowd, did not nod to the security personnel, and did not even cast a glance toward the gate from which Raines had been taken, away less than an hour earlier, for discipline is not about performance, but about presence. A few paces away, a father crouched by his young daughter, the same little girl who had queried earlier if the American man could harm the soldier. She pulled at his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, is that the same guard?" Her father affirmed, "That's him, but he didn't flinch when the bad man hurt him." "No," he replied gently. He held his ground. She pondered this for a moment, her young mind grappling with concepts that elude grown-ups. "Is he okay now?" "He's better than okay, sweetheart," the man answered. "He's exactly where he should be." Behind them, an elderly man in a grey wool coat adorned with a small remembrance poppy on the lapel spoke just loud enough for those nearby to catch. "That man carries his dignity like a weapon," he said, nodding toward Bell. "And it is far more potent than anything that American brought with him." Bell had not faltered. Not when provoked, not during an attack, and not when every aspect of his training and instincts must have urged him to react. He simply endured. In doing so, he emerged victorious, achieving something far more significant than any confrontation could offer. As the final echoes of the royal convoy dwindled into the London twilight, the crowd began to disperse, but at a measured, contemplative pace. They departed like people leaving a cathedral rather than a tourist site. They were no longer mere bystanders, but witnesses to something profound and significant. They had observed a tradition not merely withstand a challenge, but respond to it. Not with aggression, rage, or retribution, but with calmness, with presence, with the quiet, unwavering understanding that certain ideals transcend the individuals who attempt to belittle them. And while Trooper Bell continued his silent watch, motionless, professional, unyielding, those in attendance began to grasp a fundamental truth about strength. It is not defined by who strikes hardest. It is about who endures longest. It embodies the resolve to remain unmoved when it would be simpler to do so. It delineates the line between demanding respect and earning it so profoundly that even adversaries must concede. The American approached with weaponry, authority, and diplomatic credentials, while the Guard required only discipline, and it was discipline that prevailed. So now we pose the question: when someone seeks to undermine you publicly, what constitutes the stronger reaction, fighting back or remaining unbroken? In an era of immediate reactions and social media, is there still potency in opting for silence over spectacle? Share your views in the comments below. We read each one, and these discussions hold greater significance than you might realize. If this narrative shifted your perspective on strength and dignity, if it illuminated what authentic authority appears like, tap that like button. It genuinely makes a difference. Subscribe and hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss our daily tales of the remarkable individuals who uphold these time-honored traditions. If you know someone who needs a reminder of what true strength embodies, someone who equates power with creating the loudest noise until they are acknowledged, share this video with them. Your next Royal Guard story awaits on your screen right now. Click it, and we'll see you tomorrow with another moment that repeatedly affirms the same truth. True strength does not announce its presence, it simply stands firm. And in doing so, even the most vociferous voices in the world find they have nothing more to utter.